She has also, one other point with her governmental duties, she's also been an at-large elected member of the Norwalk Common Council. Prior to that, in terms of her private sector work, she's been a nonprofit consultant, she's been a college professor, and she's been a published researcher. Her background, briefly education-wise, she has a PhD in urban education policy from Temple University, as well as an MA in communications from Stanford University. And so with that said, I will turn it over to Representative Johnson. Welcome again. We're delighted to have you here.
Thank you so much, Lisa. Nice to see you. Thank you, Felicia. Thanks, everyone. I see friendly faces and friends in the audience, and I'm sorry I can't be with you today, but as you can tell from my voice, it's a couple registers lower. I didn't want to get anyone sick, so I would be with you in person, but I'm glad I can be with you today. So if I have to mute to cough, just hold on. Hopefully I'll make it through. I didn't want to reschedule because I know that what HAYVN is doing is so important, and they've gathered some great people online too. I just want to make sure everyone can hear me all right. Is everyone can hear me in the room? Great. And online, I assume we're good too. Good. I want to speak with you all today because I've heard of the good work you've done, but I also know that sustainability is such an important part of the work you're doing. And fundamentally, there's so much going on at the state level that, just for case in point, I had our policy team put together a packet for you all to share, and I've given it to Felicia, and we literally had to edit it down, and we could barely get it down to 20 pages because there's just a lot going on, a lot of small movements that hopefully will aggregate into bigger movements, but then also a lot of things we're trying to do, frankly, to make sure we meet the climate target, like Lisa said, in 10 years or less, when we know that this has been on the horizon for 20 years plus. So a lot of the things that we're going to talk about today were set in motion even 20 years ago. And I can tell you, since I joined the legislature this past year, the first session was a long session, and a lot of us on the Climate Caucus, of which I'm a member, felt that more should have happened, to be honest. And that I'm open about, because what I'll tell you is we were meeting and we're making sure that for the short session that convenes in February, it goes through May, that we will have some agenda items, some of which might be the most talked about and potentially controversial of the session. So I'll get to that in a little bit. But again, I want to make sure we have plenty of time for conversation and questions. So I'll share my screen. I have made the more kind of nuanced policy packet for you all to kind of do a deep dive later. But let me again share my screen so that I can share my deck with you all today. So here, to get us started, is just an outlook, as I talked about with Lisa and Felicia, just giving you all, because of the sustainability and social impact focus, giving you an outlook at what we're looking to do in the state government in 2024. A lot of what we're looking to do, as I said, requires us to take a little bit of a look back and take stock of where we're at, and promises that we've made through laws that we've passed years before, 20 years before some of them, and seeing how we can make good on those promises. So today, the roadmap for our conversation right now will start us off with state initiatives and legislation. I know that's the big focus of what we're here to do today. But I also think we can't talk about the state without talking about some of the advancements in municipalities. I'm going to be a little biased towards Norwalk because I had a lot of experience working for climate action at the city level as a council member and as an advocate kind of through my life, wherever I've lived. But there's also a lot of good stuff going on in Westport. So I'll just use those two as examples because I know, but those two do represent, I think, some of the forward thinking in Fairfield County. Norwalk most recently, and this has been a long push, I know I've been part of an early voice on that, is seeking to become a much greener city, perhaps one of the greener cities in Connecticut, and Westport really has a deep commitment to sustainability. So we'll talk a little bit about advancements there and some things on the horizon in the western region of our Council of Governments, including Fairfield County, of course. Next, as Lisa mentioned, I'm the proud author and introducer of the Green Jobs Core bill that passed this past session. And I want to talk a little bit about it, but also what it might mean for some next steps and what we can do more to partner with businesses and especially bring in the pathways piece with careers in green jobs. Lastly, air quality and water quality are of utmost importance, but as Lisa mentioned, I wanted to specifically focus on some water quality conversation because that is such a pressing issue given that we are coastal communities down here in Fairfield County mostly, and that we are also dealing with unprecedented stormwater mitigation challenges and sea level rise. So that's our roadmap, and we'll start with the state initiatives. There are a lot of things we're doing, and in all governments, it's all three branches. I've learned, being in the legislative branch, that a lot of what we need to do, and the Green Jobs Core bill, and I'll talk about later, is a good example of what can happen if you work with another branch well. But with the GreenerGov Connecticut website, for example, is something the executive branch has done. And I think it's great we live in a state here in Connecticut that has decided to set the tone. And I think a lot of municipalities have taken notice and have tried to do their own version. What GreenerGov Connecticut fundamentally is it's meant to provide transparency and incentives for the agencies of the state to take initiative to be greener. It gives them tools and it gives them access to information that helps them make greener choices, whether that's procurement or that's just day-to-day operations. The state of Connecticut and the executive branch has made that commitment through the GreenerGovCT. So that website is a way for you to figure out what our taxpayer money is helping our executive branch agencies do to be more green and sustainable. Another thing I know, Lisa, we talked about this, the Connecticut Green Bank, the first in the nation, is something that I think has helped our homeowners in Norwalk and I believe in Westport as well. It's helped businesses. I know in Norwalk, a huge warehouse in Norwalk went all solar on their roof because of this program. It is a way for individuals and businesses in our state to make sure that they have access to available fundings and incentives and rebates and some credits to either create battery storage on their facilities or in your homes to make sure you can go solar if you're in a spot that is conductive to having that energy capture, as well as making sure that we have some kind of fiscal, like a fiscal imperative, right, to incentivize businesses to make it a good capital investment for them, a return on that investment for years to come, but also give some energy independence to homeowners. One thing I love about the Green Bank, and I can talk about this a little bit when I get to some state initiatives here, is a bill that I co-sponsored, but unfortunately did not pass yet, but is probably going to come back in some form, is to try to use the Green Bank as a way for municipalities to have some funding available should they want to put solar on their school buildings. And as we know, if you look at municipal buildings, most of the holdings are schools. And so if we can turn our municipal buildings greener through funding from the Connecticut Green Bank to incentivize our schools to go solar, that is a really great project that the Safe and Healthy Carbon-Free Schools Act hopefully can become reality at some point. The Green Bank is going to be instrumental in making that happen. As Lisa mentioned, we've got three things I think coming up on the docket in 2024 that I can see as being very important. One has to do with solid waste and how we're going to tackle that. Another has to do with electric vehicles, and I'll get to that because that might be quite controversial, unfortunately, for those of us who want to kind of sure we move ahead for a carbon-free electric grid and reduce emissions. And then lastly, I think there's going to be some movement on making sure that we have some guardrails put in place to help move us along to our climate goals. Right now, the Clean Air Act of 2022 is something that the state legislature passed before I joined, just a year before I joined. This was in some part in the works. It was a priority bill. It was called Senate Bill 4, and the top 10 bills of the Senate are all the priorities of the Senate. It was number 4. And what it sought to do was make sure that people could have more access to electric vehicles. As we know, a lot of times ownership is prohibitive. The cost of ownership is a little higher. The price points aren't quite there for working families. And also the infrastructure for charging is not quite there for people to feel like it is a real possibility for them, especially if they have to travel long distances for work or for family. So the Connecticut Clean Air Act was passed, and in some part, it passed with urgency because in 2022, as you probably remember, there was a Supreme Court decision that came down, I believe it was West Virginia versus EPA, and it fundamentally said that the Congress of the United States of America should be making decisions about how we power the country, not the EPA. So this had absolute implications on the way in which we generate power, whether or not it's carbon-free or clean energy or fossil fuel based. And so given that, there was an imperative in the legislature to really say, as a state, we want to be committed to making sure we continue with the Clean Air Act federally, but also do things as a state that will help us. As you probably know, down in Fairfield County, we have a corridor on 95 that produces a lot of pollution. We are getting the way that the jet stream and other currents work, we're getting most of Ohio's pollution from the Midwest. We are seen as one of the more polluted areas in the country. And unfortunately, we are obviously close to New York City as well. So that means there's a lot of pollution that we see. We all know what it looked like at the beach during the pandemic after people stopped driving, just for example. We also have heavily trafficked, as I said, I-95 with trucks, and a lot of trucks passing through from New York to Boston and so on. So it's really imperative, I think, that we make sure that we situate it in Fairfield County, because among many places in the state, we're experiencing air quality issues that other parts of the state that are more rural don't necessarily have the traffic we have and the truck traffic that we have. I can speak more about that during our question and answer and do more of a deep dive if you like. The issue that I think we're going to be facing more, because we did pass the Clean Air Act in 2022 here in the state, is what are we going to do this session in 2024, and you probably read about it in the news, about the proposed electric vehicle standards. So we authorized standards back in 2004. So almost 20 years ago, the legislature voted literally, like almost unanimously to require us to adopt standards mirroring California for light duty passenger vehicles. Now, the thing that I've learned is that you either go with the EPA regulations or you go with California, given that there's such a large state and it can command a large market share for vehicles and purchasing vehicles, and therefore mandating certain innovation. Well, the issue has become, as we've seen over the past few presidential terms, depending who's in office, one administration can reverse another administration's goals on any number of policy issues. And when it comes to a carbon-free electric grid, or more specifically, electrification of vehicles, we saw a reversal over the past 4 years prior to 2020 from what was done in the 8 years prior. And so it was at this point a realization that staying with California has been what a lot of states have decided to do, Connecticut being one of them. We're joined by at least 8 other states, Rhode Island, Massachusetts. Some of our neighbors are also a part of this or going to be soon a part of this. And the issue coming up in 2024 is, how do we take what was in the Clean Air Act in 2022 and make sure we move forward on promises we made to authorize our Department of Environment and Energy Environmental Protection, DEEP. I use acronyms all the time, I'm forgetting what they stand for, but DEEP, which is our environmental agency in the executive, we authorize them to adopt the California standards for medium and heavy duty vehicles in the Clean Air Act. So now our charge this coming session is going to be to make sure that we will vote on whether or not we really follow through with that. So that is going to be perhaps one of the more contentious votes we're going to have to take this session, to make sure that we follow through on the promises we made in 2004 and 2022, so that we can work in partnership with these coalition of states to adopt both light duty and medium and heavy duty standards for our vehicles. This is becoming potentially a really partisan, unfortunately, a partisan issue, but I think in many ways, the folks that are emerging as supporting this are a wide variety of coalition of environmental groups, public health groups, climate tech, employment, business, groups. And that is going to be something we're going to have to see kind of how we can work together to make this something that that comes to fruition. I think that the issue becomes the longer we wait, the more these vehicles will cost our not only our consumers here in the state if we don't kind of move with the tide, but also how do we make sure we can secure some of the federal funding that the Biden administration with the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act is reserving for creating more of an infrastructure around electric vehicles. So that to me, this how we're going to create a carbon-free electric grid and also how we're going to electrify more vehicles to reduce the pollution, to improve the air quality, or at least stabilize it, is going to be one of the biggest things we deal with this session in the climate and sustainability, if not the biggest. I know that DEEP is working on this, and a lot of us in the legislature are trying to figure out how we do this work together and create a coalition so that there is a benefit for everybody, especially rural communities who have been rather left behind by some of this electrification and benefits. One thing I'll say is that there's a regs review is the short name for the regulation review committee. It's co-chaired, including one of our local reps, Lucy Dathan from Norwalk, and she lives in New Canaan. She represents part of New Canaan. She's the Democratic co-chair of that bipartisan committee. And in November, actually in a couple of weeks, on November 28th, they are reviewing this regulation about medium and heavy duty trucks. So if you feel very passionately about this, I would say definitely reach out. If you're a Connecticut resident, reach out to your representatives and your senator to make sure they know how you feel about this, because this again is going to be a huge issue. Again, we can talk more about it later. I just want to give a general overview about how it relates to some previous legislation and why I think that's, from what I'm hearing, going to be one of the biggest issues we face this next year. Now, some municipal initiatives. I think that I can't talk about the state without talking about municipal, because so much of what we do at the state level, and this is interesting coming from the municipal up to the state, is saying to municipalities, please do this. Like, we're going to mandate you to do this, or we're going to give you an option. You can opt out if you prove that you've already got something working for you. But when it comes to municipal initiatives, we are so fortunate to live in a county that, generally speaking, is really leading the way in a lot of ways. And I'm biased, but I think that Norwalk and Westport have really unique sustainability movements, each to their own, doing great things. A lot of them revolve around net zero and zero waste. The push from a lot of my constituents to make sure, and this goes back to the state, that we have a solid food waste plan, that we have solid recycling plans, because we're seeing, and I saw this before I left the council, Norwalk, a dip in recycling municipally, in the municipality. And I know, Lisa, we spoke about this, but fundamentally, we're paying for garbage pickup and recycling pickup. So as taxpayers in our municipalities, so making sure that that is something that is a win for the environment, but also for us investing in our city governments is going to be important. One way in which we've tried to do this in Norwalk, and we're leading the state, is, among other municipalities, not just us, is to have composting available through our public works department. We do not yet have curbside, and some places in the state, I hear, are really working hard on that, but they need the state to provide some guidance and some guardrails for us across the state to do that. So, for example, I wouldn't be shocked if we see the solid waste bill trying to make some progress again, trying to get composting into more municipalities in the state. The zero waste movement in Westport is really amazing with Sustainable Westport and what they're doing. They've done a lot with, as you have mentioned, the upcycling of fashion. They have, sustainability fairs where they're trying to get people to use, to get off single-use plastics, to bring their own cups to the coffee shop. And even the students at Staples High School have done amazing things. And they just recently, this past weekend, had what's become an annual sustainability holiday fair, where they do all sorts of great things on all these issues. So the zero waste movement is huge, and food scraps and food waste are seen as a huge part of it. One shout out I want to give is to nonprofits like Food Rescue, who work really hard to make sure that food that's on the shelves at, say, Costco or Trader Joe's gets delivered by volunteers in their own cars to places like Person to Person in Norwalk and Darien. And I was lucky to go on a food rescue with them earlier this summer and talk with some of their volunteers in the spring around Food Insecurity Day and Earth Day, because of the great work they're doing to divert food that would otherwise end up in landfills into places where people can use it. So I think that's a huge part of the equation that needs to be considered as well. As I mentioned, the EV infrastructure is a real challenge. I have colleagues that live in Fairfield County that have electric vehicles, and they're driving home from Hartford at 2 a.m. after we voted with no heat on in the winter because they don't have enough charge to make it home. We have one charging bay in the legislative office building parking garage, so far as they've told me. And often if you see some of them, they'll leave the floor together because they're switching vehicles, right, to charge. That's just emblematic of how we need to build out the infrastructure. And a lot of the federal money coming down is going to be specifically for that. In Norwalk, we've tried to make sure that we're building that out. And that is something that even comes down to planning and zoning and ordinances. For example, in Norwalk, we have a zoning issue right now, as I see it, where you cannot put a charger on the, as I understand it, like you have to put it on a certain part of your home, of the building. So if you're charging a car, it's confined to a certain part of your building. And I think that we need to make it a little easier for people to install these home charging so that they can have that. That's just one example of how planning and zoning can be a huge part of this. And climate mitigation efforts, as you know, has been something that's been very important to so many of us because we're coastal. We see the projections of where we're going to be in 20 years with sea level rise. But we also know with every massive rainstorm we get that we're seeing our wetlands flood, we're seeing basements flood, we're seeing streets flood. And if it's at high tide, it's even worse in our coastal communities. So in Norwalk, we've done a lot. And one of the things that's come up through the rezoning conversation is to make sure that we prioritize climate mitigation, not only safe routes for residents to evacuate, unfortunately, but we need to make sure that our water treatment plant is safe. We need to make sure that we have reduced flooding in our neighborhoods. Just recently, grants came down from the bonding and supported by the governor for one specific neighborhood in my district in Norwalk, where we're going to, and I'll talk about this a little later when we talk about stormwater quality, but separate out our sewer overflows from our stormwater. And that's a huge issue with Fairfield County, as we know, with this older infrastructure. So climate mitigation is on a lot of people's minds, and how we're going to use perhaps natural barriers to achieve that. And climate action plans are a municipal tool. When I was on the council, I was really proud to propose and advocate for this, and now it's in process, and I think we're getting close to a final draft. Just recently, if you're aware of WestCog, so that's Western Connecticut, the COGs are a substitute in some way, for lack of a better term, for our county government. Since we don't have county governments, we have these what are called COGs. And they are trying to create, using federal funding, a regional climate action plan for the Stamford, Norwalk, Bridgeport metropolitan area. So that's going to be very interesting because it will cover the municipalities that have yet to create a climate action plan, but it will also be very interesting to see how that works well, hopefully, with those like Norwalk that have taken the initiative already to do it using, in our case, ARPA funding. So that's coming, and that's big. This fall, they're having meetings about it. If you're interested, I'm happy to connect you with them if you'd like to learn more. Lastly, there's really great resources. I can say firsthand that SustainableCT, very big part of the first part of our climate action planning in Norwalk. They've been really great. A lot of their work is to offer municipalities rating systems, according to metrics. So, for example, Westport, I believe, is at least silver. Norwalk was bronze, and working on that. But it gives targets for municipalities should they opt in to make themselves more sustainable. And I can't say enough good things about Circa. That's a Yukon entity that has been working with Norwalk and other municipalities around the state very closely. We did a lot of heat mapping in Norwalk in our urban core, because obviously heat index rising in urban areas is a huge public health issue. They're also working on the second part of our zoning rewrite with our Conservation Commission in Norwalk. being a resource to us. And I'm really glad that our planning and zoning has reached out to them, because they are a really invaluable resource in trying to really solve some of these audacious problems that we're facing, knowing that the sea level rise is coming and we already have issues with these rain bonds. I don't want to get in the weeds too much, but we can talk later again about specifics. I want to move on to green jobs. I'll take a brief sip of my tea. So, excuse me. I could speak about this bill for a while because I immersed myself in it and lived it for the past 9 months. I was thinking about a Green Jobs Corps bill when I was on the campaign trail, honestly, because the more I talked to younger people, people who are younger than me, millennials, Gen Z, and certainly the alphas, the youngest of us, but also talking to folks in business, talking to folks in higher education, and that's my background as an education policy researcher, and seeing what we had done more recently through executive actions of the governor. In his first term, Governor Lamont passed some executive actions I think were really important for the environment, for sustainability. And one of them was to establish a Clean Economy Council, and he established the Office of Workforce Strategy. So the Clean Economy Council is subsumed under the OWS, and it's their job to fundamentally help create the workforce that we're going to need to meet the state's climate goals. When I was thinking about this bill, I felt, the missing piece in the executive action was bringing in pathways from our schools into these careers. So if you are a high school senior and you want to work for a solar company or be an engineer and work on creating wind farms or any number of the green jobs that will become more available in the next several years, how do you know how to achieve that goal? So this was fundamentally to work with OWS to create a plan to provide the workforce to meet our state's climate goals. So they have to map the plan for workforce development onto meeting the goals. So it's audacious. A lot of this was already in progress. The piece that was missing in many ways was creating those pathways for the careers. We had old career maps from Department of Labor from a while back that were mandated by other legislation. So this was fundamentally meant to all house it under the Connecticut Clean Economy Council and empower them to do that work. They're due to provide a report in January of 2024, and my hope is we will not only receive the report in the legislature, but it will give us a good starting point to see how we can work together to make this even more impactful. Fundamentally, what I'm hearing when I talk to businesses that want to come to Connecticut or the people that represent them is that they need the workforce. And a lot of times the credentialing right now doesn't necessarily sync with the jobs that they have. So making sure that we work with all the interested parties so that that person going through that credentialing process is set for that job when they graduate and they have the skills that the employer needs. I think that's really the next step of the Green Jobs Corps bill, is further making the maps clearer and making sure businesses are involved in that process. So it's not unfortunately leading to an unintended consequence of a mismatch at the end of all that effort on the part of both the businesses and the potential employees. Again, I could talk about the Green Jobs Corps bill for a long time, but I think there's a lot of potential for talking about pathways for other careers, and in our higher education system, I'm lucky to sit on the higher ed committee, which is where this bill came out of. But it kind of was one of those bills not on the radar of a lot of people, but maybe that's because of the committee it came out of, but I'm glad that we got it through, and it was near unanimous, which is great. So happy to talk about that with anybody at any time. The fourth part of water quality, and as Lisa said, this is, we know, one of the biggest issues we face. We have issues that the state of Connecticut and DEEP has identified all the way back when, for 20 plus years, the federal Clean Water Act has guided the state in ways that has helped us identify, issues like groundwater contamination, combined sewer overflows, as I mentioned, stormwater impacts and sea level rise. And I'd add to that more recently the awareness around PFAS And neonics and pesticides is something that I think might be the third of the major focus that I mentioned earlier. This could possibly be the third that we push on. We got kind of close with a bill on rodenticide and pesticides. And this is something I can tell you when I talk to environmental advocates. Louise Washer is an amazing example of somebody who's been awarded very recently by state organizations as being just a champion for our water quality. She is the head of the Norwalk River Watershed Association. She deserves so much credit for what we've done in Norwalk. She's a Norwalker, about guiding us through more awareness around the effects of neonics on not only the environment and animals like birds of prey and other animals, but also how that gets into our water supply. PFAS, as we know, is everywhere, and it's in all of us. The question becomes, because it's everywhere, how do we mitigate that in our water supply? And because we're a coastal community, this also deals, I think, a great deal with our businesses that depend on the water. So, for example, aquaculture in Norwalk, especially, and off the Norwalk Islands, is a huge family-owned business. As you know, Norm Bloom and Company and his family is perhaps one of the last great independent oystering businesses. And I know that he has done so much for the water quality on the Sound through Harbor Watch in concert and collaboration with Earth Place in Westport. There's a real concern, I think, with PFAS that is going to affect our water quality if we don't try to remove it from our consumer goods. Water quality, generally speaking, because of groundwater contamination and combined sewer overflows, is already really important. And fundamentally, there's billions of dollars needed. If I'm being completely honest, which is what I do, we were going to need billions of dollars to uncouple sewer overflows from stormwater in Fairfield County, given how old our infrastructure is. I know Darienne's done a lot of work here. Norwalk is continuing to do a lot of work with ARPA funding and state funding, and the federal funding for that is going to need to be a huge part of what we do. The stormwater impacts when our sea levels rise in concert with these huge rain-bound storms. This is going to be something we really need to invest in our infrastructure. So the will has to be there to spend the money on it, I think, in a way that is going to make significant impacts for people. But a lot of it is delayed, to be honest. We've had a lot of building up over the years and needing to uncouple. So one thing I'm proud of Norwalk doing is that every time we go in to repair and there is a combined, we have separated it just as a matter of practice. And I think that's a good municipal practice. So one last thing that I want to mention, which I don't know if we'll address this session, but I think it's really important for Fairfield County. I think it's really important for Westport and the part of Norwalk that I serve, which is wetlands. So much of our area is reclaimed wetland. And there are parts of Westport that are literally wetlands that were built on. And so we're seeing more flooding. We're seeing creeks and brooks flood over into yards. We're seeing a lot of this issue. And a recent Supreme Court case just from a few months ago, Sackett v. EPA, has really called into question federally about how we can designate wetlands. So I think, I wouldn't be shocked if we're going to start seeing some states go state by state to see if we can't better protect wetlands and conserve them. And I know Connecticut's been forward thinking on things. That is going to be something that it may not show up in 2024, but I can see wetland protection being a huge issue into the future. Because as we have increased storms and increased rain, we're going to have more issues, and all of that then gets sent downstream. So whatever you spray in your yard is getting picked up, especially if you live near wetlands, and it gets down into the Sound through our rivers. So that's going to be a huge issue. And last but not least, I just want to thank everybody. I know I threw a lot of information at you, but I want to be sure that you all know that while there's a lot of information, I think part of our job is to make sure that we can present the information as clearly as possible, but then when you want more, we're here for you. So for example, I'm just sharing right now the packet that I've sent over, And if you just take the table of contents, while too small for you to see here, just runs from air pollution all the way to how we deal with regulating utility companies, and to making sure that all of us, including those of us in environmental justice communities, have access to a better, more efficient, and cleaner way to heat your home. I'll leave you with this. The issues we have with sustainability, as we know, really deal with, in many parts, the emissions of the transportation and the housing sectors of our society. And so I think that it's not surprising that what we're starting to see are solutions and challenges around those issues, right? How are we going to create more efficient housing? How are we going to heat those homes more efficiently? And how are we going to make sure we can get around in ways that are far more beneficial, less destructive to the environment? So those, I think, are the two sectors that if we can really tackle, and if we have the workforce to tackle them, we're going to make great strides. So with that, I will pass it back to Lisa and Felicia, and I made it without coughing, so I'm grateful for that. But I'm really happy to have a conversation now about all this, and if you like, provide a little more information on specifics.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. Does anyone have any questions? She's got such a diverse base of knowledge. I think she can answer just about anything.
All right, I'll ask a question. Hi, Dominique. Thank you so much for being here today. I hope you can hear me from, I don't know how well you can hear me.
I can hear you great, too. Nice to see you.
So talking about pesticides and runoff, I live in a coastal community, as you know, and everybody sprays their lawn, and then you have rainstorms and the runoff goes right. And I think even the stuff that says, oh, it's a green spray, we know is toxic. And, you know, I walk my dog, everyone's got the little pesticide sprayed things here. Is there any kind of effort being made to curb some of all of that spraying of the lawns? Because lawns are really bad for the environment.
That's a great question. And see, I know that even when I, take my dog on a walk, I see pesticides, and unfortunately, trying to get that bill through. I'm trying to figure how to say this. Like, unfortunately, a lot of the environmental bills can be used as ways to, like, some people really don't like some of them, and I think it can be a way that we have to choose which ones can make it through sometimes.
Yeah.
And these are happening in rooms that are higher than me, So the negotiations about what bills make it through, you can get really close on a bill, you think it's going to move, and then all of a sudden it doesn't. So something happened in the negotiation. And that pesticide bill this past session, to me, was one of them.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of support for it in our communities. The companies we heard from that work in pesticide management are obviously concerned about their livelihood. So I don't know if it was like a lobbying thing. I think more or less it might have just been an environmental thing. There was a bill to ban neonics in the state. I think we might be getting close, but I don't know. Again, like, things fall apart sometimes at the very last minute for reasons unknown to a lot of us. But fundamentally, I think environmental bills kind of have a red flag attached to them. They get very politicized. To your point, we need to make sure that, and I think, frankly, if you are in a wetland already in the city of Norwalk, you cannot cut down trees, and you should not be treating property. There's certain requirements already on you if you are living in a wetland or close to a wetland, and there are maps on the city websites that indicate that. So I think a lot of our neighbors just may not be aware of the fact that they're doing things that they should not be doing. So I think a lot of public education should be raised about it. And I think fundamentally, we're probably going to have to ban certain pesticides and herbicides statewide for municipalities to really be forced to kind of reckon with that in their own communities. I'm concerned because, the will to do it sometimes wanes. But to your point, where we live, it's really important. And one thing I've heard is a lot of the, we get everything down here from the rivers up that start up in the Canadian border, right? So we are the endpoint. So it's not just a localized problem even, that's why it has to be a state solution, even an interstate solution, because what happens up in upstate comes down to us. So we're working on it, but it didn't pass this past session. But because we're working on it and they're really committed to it, I wouldn't be shocked, like I said, if it shows up as one of the 3 priorities trying to get across the finish line. One thing I'll say, not to get too policy wonky, but everything in the second session of the term is driven by what the committee chairs want. So only bills that are proposed by committee chairs are worked on. So the committee chairs respectively have to be on board. So that's another potential plus or minus depending. And secondly, typically they always have to be dealing with the budget or the implementation of the budget. So sometimes if it doesn't fit those 2 criteria, it might have to wait till the next term. So we'll see. That was a long answer to your question. But
I have a question on a similar topic, related to kind of personal lawn maintenance, is the leaf blower, gas powered leaf blowers and mowers, which has been a huge topic in Westport. And one of the biggest issues is the cost to the providers the servicers, they just say it's too challenging to maintain and they can't afford it. So I'm wondering, is there any role the state can play in terms of the green bank and providing some incentives to the landscaping companies to make the transition? Then it would be much easier for individuals to make that choice.
that is a great, that to me, I think I agree with you. Personally, I think that's how we have to move forward, because I just left the Norwalk Council when this issue came up for us. I was following closely what Westport was doing. And Westport, struck more of a compromise, it feels like, because of the noise, element of them. But yeah, we heard, as you might have followed, when it came into the news in Norwalk, a lot of these companies came to the council and said, look, this is my livelihood. We need to phase this in. We need assistance. So I think helping these they're fundamentally small businesses, most of them, helping them with a way to incentivize that change is necessary. So I love the idea of having the Green Bank be a way in which we could help that. I don't know if the Green Bank's purview is, individual equipment for small businesses, but if it is, this is a great idea. I think there's also things we could do with, like I said, the pesticide and herbicide management companies in a similar way. Like, how do we help them transition to other products? The mandates oftentimes are unfunded for these companies. So that I think is a great idea.
I've got a question with, so much is talked about with the flooding, and of course, we've had a lot more flooding, I think, the past 20 years than 20 prior, living in this area a long time. But when it comes to the extreme of droughts, it seems like the past, say, 6 or 7 years, we've had more bouts of droughts without making it a rhyme. Do you have any insight or information on where we stand with droughts also becoming more pervasive, or are we in an area that might be more drought ridden in the state? Because they have become, there's more of them, I think, again, the past 6-7 years. And I don't just like bring that up because it's not all about just the flooding side.
Of course, you're absolutely right. I think I have not heard anything yet about anything related to drought that we would be legislating. But what I can say is, oftentimes the idea that we're in a drought complicates the water piece, in the sense of, if you talk to our water companies during the droughts, the big question is, will we have enough water, and are water usage restrictions going to be put into place? And they have been in the past few years over the summer, right? In some municipalities. So the kind of the false sense we get from these massive rainstorms is that we're fine. But as we know, and this deals with the stormwater runoff, when you have these massive rainstorms and a ground that is dry, it doesn't soak up enough of the water, and a lot of that becomes runoff. So all the water we're getting from the sky is not actually going into the ground to offset the drought in the way that conventional thinking might suggest. It's really unfortunate, because too much rain at one time is like too much of a good thing, right? So, excuse me. So I think that's going to be an issue, is water availability in addition to water quality. If we continue having these droughts, the extremes, I think, are going to be a part of life, it seems. But I don't know of any legislation. Yeah.
I have a question. This is kind of a pet project that I'd love to see something happen. We talked about, there's always, the traffic is horrendous here. And I'm just wondering if there's any initiatives in the government to have ferries at all in terms of each, you know, from even Fairfield County, like I've seen in the past, they had like a farmer, like a farmer's market on the water that someone had started a while ago, or yeah, there's so many opportunities that we could help with the commute if we had some ferries. If you've heard anything.
That's a great, I think, are you mentioning Harbor Harvest? Because I forgot to mention them. They are wonderful.
Yeah.
And I know
I
they
couldn't
work,
remember what it was.
oh,
Yeah.
good. They work with, they're out of Norwalk. They work with the Booms, I think, and others. They have a boat that they're using to carry produce right across the sound. Out of there, and they have that shop in East Norwalk, the store. I love the idea of making sure we use water transportation. Excuse me. I think that a lot of what I've heard is some of that is federal. And so we're going to need our federal delegation to speak up for us on that. I don't want to put them on the record, but I know I've had some conversations with Congressman Hines. I'm clearly nearing my ability here at 11.
Yeah, we're running up on our hour.
However, I think that that's something we gotta unpack. Independent private companies could see that as a real possibility, I think.
Yeah, we should probably wrap.
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I'm
Okay.
literally so-
Yeah. I know you've been raising that hand.
Yeah, I know.
So, yeah, we should let you go. We
That is
can.
super for everybody. Sorry about that. Yeah.
Okay. Oh.
True.
Yeah, I know. Thank you so much for being here, and we appreciate it. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. I'll be in touch. We're good. Thanks all.